Happy Friday, everyone. See a lot of very well-dressed people in the room today. I assume that's because you wanted to be dressed up for Excel Friday, which appreciate that. Thank you very much for your efforts in that regard. Obviously, you're dressed up for Meet the Firms, which I assume that you've gone out to meet the firms. I do have a bit of a quandary. I need your help on this one, all right? So I have received emails from multiple people in this class, and they said, my schedule is so packed that I don't have time between 10 and 2 to do Meet the Firms. Is it okay if I skip class to actually do that? I'm a bit of a quandary. It's like, on one hand, it's Excel Friday. This is really important stuff, okay? On the other hand, I've already said that if you're going to be doing something that furthers your career, if you're going to be doing something professional, that's an excused absence. So I think that it's fair for me to say that if students legitimately don't have any other opportunity or time or opportunity to go out to meet the firms, that this class is an opportunity for them. I'm going to be I'm going to be reasonable enough in that regard. So is everybody okay with that? Now, that being said, my expectation is that anybody who is not here present in the class right now, I'm looking at you, camera, all right? Anybody who's not here in the class right now, present, they should be required to watch the video to make sure that they catch up on all the good Excel material and review the homework. Can we agree that that's the case? Okay, so if they don't watch the videos, then they're basically not doing their homework, right? And we've got just all these homework points lying around that could be better used to other places. So here's what I say. It's about a formal vote from the rest of us. There are people who are in the classroom, okay? So anybody who's not present on Zoom right now, or anybody who's not here from the classroom, if they don't watch the video, I don't think they should get homework credit. In fact, we should take that homework points and we should distribute it amongst everybody else in the class. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. Now I'm going to leave it for the people who are online. They're going to have to contact me and let me know if they're not okay with this. Okay. I'm going to take the unanimity because everybody's hands were raised. And you can't prove that that's not true. Okay. Everybody's hands were raised. They said that was absolutely fine. So if you are not here present physically in the class right now, and you're not watching on Zoom and live, if you're going to be watching this on YouTube, you need to actually send me an email and say, Dr. Barnes, I am not okay with you giving my points to everybody else in the class to prove that you actually watched this video after you went to meet the firms. I think that is a reasonable conclusion. Can we all agree to that? I'm glad that you're all coming along with me on this one. Okay, glad you got an attorney. This actually, it's a running gag. I've done this multiple class periods. There was a conference for a organization here in the School of Business. I'm not going to tell you the name of the organization, but their initials are DSP. And they had a bunch of my students who were in my accounting class had to miss or my auditing class had to miss for a national conference. And I actually made the joke. I said, I think that if they don't tell me, or if they don't prove that they had watched the video to make sure that they did the homework review, we should give the homework points to everybody else in the class. And there were 6 of these students, again, no names of the organization, just initials DSP, okay? There were 6 of the people in this organization. Guess how many of them emailed me, said they opposed me giving the homework points out of 6 people who missed that class period. Give you a hint, it was less than 6. It was much less than 6. It was exactly 0, okay? Exactly 0. Now, I have really, really positive feelings about this organization, but I like to tease them from time to time about this, okay? Those of you who know what DSP is, then, just no offense. It's just an anonymous organization, as we all know. Anonymous organization. All right. I could go on telling stories all day, but you guys taught me to paying me to do stuff like this. So let's talk about some Excel stuff today. So we're going to do some more remedial Excel things. I tend to layer some of the remedial things that I do with stuff that's fun or stuff that's a little bit less intuitive. So the first stuff that we're going to talk about it's useful, but I don't think it's probably groundbreaking. I think most of this you probably could figure out on your own or you already know. But let's just go ahead and talk about it. So we've got my banner ID students as we had last time, and I've got them listed in there, and we've got the exam 1 scores. And the exam 1 scores came out like this. Usually my exam scores don't come out this way because I usually have numbers that are going to be rounded to a whole integer. But for this one, I basically took numbers and I divided them by 13. And so that's how you get numbers that have expanding decimal places to infinity. But I want to actually have this limited, and you make the argument, yes, you could round this, so you could just kind of click the decimal places and say, I want to make the decimal places smaller like that. By the way, has anybody ever tried to use the decimal place mover on the toolbar for Excel? Okay. Has anybody gotten confused and done the wrong direction? Okay. If you said no, you're a liar. All right. You're a liar. Everybody's made that mistake at least once. I still make that mistake today. But let's say that I want to actually have truly rounded numbers. I want to have truly rounded numbers. So let's go ahead and talk about the round function. Now, the round function is just basically as it sounds, it's going to round to whatever decimal place you specify. So over in E2, we're going to say equals round, and we're going to look at D2. That's the cell that we want to do the round. And we go to the number of digits. And I want to round to 2 decimal places. So in this case, I want to do 67.5, and then whatever the round is. In this case, it'd be 7, because it's going to round up. So I'm going to say 2 decimal places. Not particularly difficult, pretty easy to figure out. And again, just because of relative cell references, we can copy and paste this down pretty easily. Of course, in a lot of situations, I'm not looking for decimal places. I'm looking for the nearest whole integer. So let's go ahead and do another round function with that same data. Let's round to 0. I promise this is going to reach a crescendo here, and you're going to be like, oh, that's pretty cool, okay? And if you don't think it's cool, then I'm sorry, I tried my best. But we're going to go to the same exam score, and this time we're going to round to the nearest integer. For 2 decimal places, we specified 2, okay? So to hold an integer, we're going to specify 0. All right, so now you know that I've got next to the round to the hundreds, all right? And basically what this is that I'm going to round to either 100 or 0, depending what the value is. If it's above 50 or above, it's going to round to 100. If it's below 50, round to 0. Now, what's the formula for that? I know it sounds non-intuitive, but you probably figured it out by now. So I'm going to give you like 30 seconds to type in the formula and see if you can figure it out. What is the formula that I would use to round to the nearest 100? Not hundredth, to the nearest 100. So the results are either going to be 100 or 0. And I know you're thinking to yourself, this can't possibly be correct. And I promise you it is. I promise you it is. Unless it's something that I'm thinking, unless you're thinking something different than I'm thinking, then it's probably not. All right, so we got the round function. To round to 2 decimal places, we said 2. To round to no decimal places, we said 0. So we want to round to hundreds, okay, which is going to be 1 more 2 decimal places to the left. What am I going to enter? -2. That was my crescendo, by the way, guys. If you're not impressed by that, I don't know what I can do for you. Okay. But yeah, we'll round to -2. Just kind of a funny little function. This is actually a story that you may hear me tell it multiple times. And if you're an accounting major, get used to this, because I will tell the same story over and over again because I'm old and I don't remember when I told the story to a certain audience. But I was doing a presentation over the opening of the innovation lab in the library. This is a couple of years ago. And Doug Vilhard and Diane Vilhard were in the room doing my presentation, and I was explaining to them that the date function is just a numeric transformation. So whenever you type in a date, it's actually the number of days since 1900, since the first day of 1900. So 1/1/1900 is day 1, and then 41,951 is like sometime in the modern era. It's interesting. Doug actually asked, well, what happens if you type in a date before 1900? Has anybody ever tried to type in a date before 1900 in Excel? Excel doesn't recognize the date. It does not like a negative number. It just will not flat out recognize the date. So this is kind of interesting. Sometimes you can do negative numeric transformations. Sometimes you can't. All right. To quote unquote round out this discussion, you see what I did there? We're going to talk about how we do round up and round down, because these are actually separate functions from rounding. So let's say that I wanted to go to the next highest number, regardless of what the decimal places is. There's actually a function for rounding up. So predictably round up. And we're just going to go to, we'll say to 0 decimal places. And you kind of see here, this is going to end up with slightly different results than this column right here. The first one is the same, but the second one is different. Because anytime there's a value greater than the previous integer, it's going to round up to the next whole integer. And presumably, we can do the same thing with round down. And we'll round down the nearest whole integer. Now, I'll be honest, I don't use round up or round down very frequently. I use rounding functions all the time. So it's good to know how to use the rounding functions. Now, the question may come, do you use rounding to the nearest 100 very frequently? Answer is no, not really. But you never know. It can come up. It's good to know the intuition behind that. As far as stuff that I use more frequently, let's go to click on the next tab, go to class codes. All right, so these are things that I will use pretty frequently in my job, and I used pretty frequently when I was working in public accounting. So one of the first things we're going to talk about the longhand method. And you may know the shortcut to this. We will actually discuss the shortcut later on in the semester. But we're going to talk about how do we merge information in cells. So I have the information for my students, and my students have got first name and last name. But let's say I want to have their full name. I want to actually have their first name followed by their last name. Does anybody know the formula that they use for that? Concatenate. Yeah, concatenate. So let's go ahead and type equals, and you can just type in con, and it will actually start coming up with answers. And if you find concatenate, glasses I can't see. Yeah, concatenate a little bit further down. You just click on that, because if you don't click on that, you have to know how to spell concatenate. It's 11 letters, okay? And nobody has that kind of time. So how are we going to do concatenate? Well, concatenate is kind of the old school formula. And like I said, there's a shorter, much more efficient one. And I tend to rebel against progress, but I will say that the shortcut is a lot easier to use. But let's go ahead and do the old school one. We're going to actually specify what is the first part of the cell we want. And I want my first name to appear first. Then I'm going to hit comma, and I'll say what comes in next. Now, for names, it's really important to note we don't have just one line of information. We don't have Michael Barnes, okay? I have to have space between my name because otherwise they're going to read it as one word. So we're going to type open quote, space, close quote, then another comma, and then I'm going to select B2 after that. So C2 quote, or C2 comma, open quote, space, close quote, comma, B2. If you do that, you should come up with names. Now, I would say that I use this all the time, but like I said, there is a shortened version of this that is a lot more convenient. When I learned about it, I thought I will never use that concatenate forever. And now I use the shortened version all the time. But I promise we'll get to that a little bit later in the semester. If you already use it, then it'll be a nice refresher. If you don't use it, the good news is you know how to concatenate information now, and you'll learn an even more efficient way later on in the course. But let's talk about some other things that are pretty frequently used. So I've got my class code here, and you'll notice my class code is not particularly clever, all right? It's just the initials of the students, followed by their track, followed by their banner ID. So 3 components, initials, students, the track, banner ID. Now, if I had that information separately, I can concatenate that to create the code. But what if I want to split it out? What if I want to instead have concatenated information? I want to take components out of a merged field. Well, that's what we're going to be using kind of separation functions, all right? And the first of these is going to be our left function. So you'll notice the initials are the left 2 characters of my class code. So I'm just going to type in left. I'm going to highlight the cell. I'm going to type in 2. All right, so that's kind of the easy way. Now, I do want to clarify something. We're going to learn all the functions here. The question always comes up, can you do this if there's a different number of characters in there? The answer is yes. We're not going to learn that today, but it is certainly possible to do it. And I'll talk a little bit about the tips on how you approach that. But I want to try to keep this at a pretty simple level for right now. Now we're going to do banner ID, which the banner ID is the number, the single number to farthest to the right. And so if we use left to pick up the initials that are on the left, then we're going to use right to pick up the stuff on the right. So right, A2, then we're going to do 1. So then we have track, and track is the middle 2 digits. Now we've already used it. We've already exhausted right and left, and we can't use those functions. So we need to have something that will pick up the middle digits, which, as predictably, you probably already know, is going to be our mid function. Now mid is a little bit different because we do specify the text, but we can't just type in a number of characters because we have to specify where it is we're starting in the function. In this case, the track, which are 2 digits in the middle, start at character number 3 and expand upon 2 digits. That's how you pick up like that. Now, when you ask a question, is this function available for if there's different lengths? So say, for example, somebody had 3 initials versus 2 initials. Or say, for example, somebody had a banner ID that was more than 1 digit. Would you be able to pick that up? The answer is it is possible to do that. The functions that or the formulas that you have to write for those tend to be a lot more complex and a little bit more complicated in nature. And they tend to involve if functions or looking at search for certain characters. So it is possible to do it. Could I expand upon that and do that? Yes. The problem being that it would get really, really confusing very, very quickly. So right now, all I want you to know is it's certainly possible to do this for a dynamic or varied set of characters. We're not going to talk about how to do that right now because we're keeping it pretty simple. We're going to look at some more complex functions that will actually be able to ferret out information like that in a much more detailed way a little bit later on in the course. But for right now, we're pretty simple. All right, now let's talk about my favorite formulas of all time. So before we do that, I want to do one quick thing. So I'd like you to highlight cells F2 through G2, or sorry, F2 through G7, excuse me. We're going to copy and we're going to paste values. And you probably notice there's actually dual purposes. First of all, what we're about to do won't work if we don't do this. Secondly, you may notice when we do that, that it comes up with these yield signs that it's like kind of saying, hey, there's a problem here. And what the problem is that when we created those formulas, it was created in text. But the cell value, the cell format that I currently have on the spreadsheet is in numeric. You can actually check that. You can click on these cells and you can say format cells, and it says number. And Excel is conflicted. It's saying, look, this input is a text input, but it sure looks like a number. Would you like for me to convert it to a number? So when you have these series of green rectangle or green triangles that are listed like that, there's a couple of options. You can click on this, and there's a few things you could do. You could say, you know what, this is correct. This is the way that I want to leave it. I want you to ignore the error. And if you highlight everything that's got that same error, it will actually do it wholesale for everything. What we're going to do this time is we're going to say, look, I need this to be in numeric format for this to work. Promise me it will not work if it's not numeric format. Hope you're paying attention right now, because if you're not doing this conversion, when we're to do this next series of formulas, you're going to be like, I'm getting NA, Dr. Martins. I'm going to say, did you do the conversion? You're going to have to sink your head in shame. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this. We're actually going to go to convert to number. And you notice that we'll convert to number because they will shift from being left indented to right indented. So has everybody got that correction made? Now, again, this was mostly informative to figure out when you see those triangles that appear in the green triangles that appear in the left, what does that mean? Basically, it's trying to resolve a discrepancy between what you see or what it sees and what the actual information is, and saying, look, you've inputted it as a text, but it looks like a number to me. Can you want me to convert to a number? Obviously, if I had a text field, if I had a word in there, it can't convert that to a number, but it can certainly convert numeric information into numbers. All right, so let's talk about this. Now, Excel has advanced since the time I started using it. When I was using it, basically we're using an abacus, to use Excel. Okay, it was much harder to use. I'm being facetious, obviously, but when I started using Excel, there was a lot more limitations on what we can do. But one of the things that I got very accustomed to doing are lookup functions, specifically VLOOKUP. The way I described it to people is when I learned how to do a VLOOKUP, it was like the heavens parted open and I saw the face of God. That's how important it was at a moment in my life. Okay, I'd say there was my birth, there was my getting my PhD, and then there was learning VLOOKUPs in that order. Okay, those are the prominent things that happened in my life. So we're going to talk about lookup functions, and you may be. I'm definitely an Excel boomer in that regard, because we're going to talk about VLOOKUPs and HLOOKUPs. You may already be acclimated to using XLOOKUPs, and the good news is these new machines that we've got, we can actually do XLOOKUPs on there. You may actually actively use them. If you do use XLOOKUPs, hold your horses. I promise we're going to get to those later in the course. A lot of the new stuff I reserve for later in the course. We're going to go old school today. We're going to talk about how we do VLOOKUPs and HLOOKUPs. Honestly, I use VLOOKUPs all the time. I use HLOOKUPs maybe once a year, if that. Okay, VLOOKUPs tend to be more frequent than that. XLOOKUPs are nice in the fact that you can actually do either array, whether it's vertical or horizontal, but they are a little bit more limited in the fact that they have to be specified arrays instead of the way we're going to do them for these lookups. But I'll explain what I mean once we're going to do that. So I've got my exam scores here, and you'll notice that I've got these listed according to banner IDs, and I don't want to just copy and paste these. I could copy and paste these over, but that's no fun. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull my rounded to 2-digit score from the previous spreadsheet. So I'm going to do a VLOOKUP for that. And that's just as it sounds, equals VLOOKUP. And then what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the banner ID that I have in column F. So in this case, I'm going to specify cell F2, hit a comma, and then I'm going to do something that you may or may not have learned when you were learning VLOOKUPs, but I'll explain why I do it this way. So I'm going to click on the exam 1 scores page, and I'm going to highlight columns A through E, the entire column. Now, when you were learning VLOOKUPs, they may have said specify an array. And you can certainly do that if you're more comfortable with it. I'm personally more comfortable with this because I do think it's a little bit easier to capture the information that I want. But I want to capture the entire columns. Note that you cannot do this with XLOOKUPs, which is one reason I don't use them as frequently. You have to actually specify a limited array of information for XLOOKUPs. For VLOOKUPs and HLOOKUPs, you can actually just specify the entire row and the entire column, which is kind of cool. So there's that case. In the formula bar, I'm going to type in comma. Then I'm going to type in 5, because what it's telling my lookup is saying, look, I want you to find the information in column A, and then I want you to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns over. In the 5th column, that is the information that I want you to return. That's what the 5 specifies. Then finally, a best practice when you're using VLOOKUPs or HLOOKUPs is to always type in false. And the reason why is, for most of the lookups you're going to do, in fact, the vast majority, I have only used this very sparingly, you want to return exact information. You're looking for an exact piece of information. If you tell it true, Excel will try to make best guesses. And Excel is not really high in artificial intelligence just currently, so its best guesses are really, really bad. Okay, it will return false, erroneous results. It will give you a lot of information that's incorrect. What we want is we want exact match information. So I want wherever the number 1 appears in the banner ID column and just the number 1, I want to return that exact result. So I want you to return the 67.57. So once we've got that input, we're going to enter there, and sure enough, the exam score comes up. Now, if you got an NA there, this is where I'm going to tell you this is why you had to do that conversion for those numbers, because otherwise that you didn't do it correctly. But if you got the 67.57, good news is you can just flash fill that. It will actually fill in your VLOOKUP. By the way, the reason it's called a VLOOKUP, I've already alluded to this, is V stands for vertical. It looks at information in a vertical array or in a column, as I specified. HLOOKUP is the kind of the pair with that. HLOOKUP is a horizontal lookup. I don't use HLOOKUPs very often, mostly because information that's presented in this manner is going to be presented vertically. But just for context of teaching, let's go ahead and do an HLOOKUP. So you'll notice I've got tracks listed down here. These are kind of the tracks that you might go if you were in accounting or with teaching. So we've got instructors that teach certain tracks. We got the one audit instructor who's the lone wolf. I shouldn't have done that. All right. And then we've got 2 tax instructors, Dr. Deers and Dr. Caden. And then we've got Dr. Otero and Dr. Eisen and even Professor Templeton who teach stuff other than tax and audit in their program. So we're going to go ahead and identify according to track. So in this case, we know what the track is, but let's go ahead and return the track type listed below. So we're going to do equals HLOOKUP. We're going to highlight rows 13 and 14. Oops, sorry, my apologies. Got a little bit ahead of myself. We need to first specify the information we're looking for here. So we're going to click on G2 first. Then we're going to highlight rows 13 and 14. Then we're going to type in 2 because we want the information in the second row, not in the first row. And then as before, we're going to type in false. All right. Everybody goes that? Get it all right? So what's up?
I guess I'm up to the point where you highlight the 13 and 14. What did you do after that?
So for that, after you highlight 13, 14, hit a comma and you press 2 because you want to specify the row that comes up, and then that's when you type in false after that.
Okay.
Now there is one more thing that we need to talk about because there's going to be a little bit of a problem with this formula. The formula itself is good, but when we flash fill, comes NA, and it's like I knew that was going to happen because I said there's a bit of a problem. Does anybody know what the problem is?
We're not how to convert the numbers, or it's already in.
You're on the right track, so it's okay.
They aren't absolute reference.
They are not absolute reference because look what happens when we look at this formula. It's saying look in rows 13 or 14. Okay. When we go down for the flash fill, because this is relative cell references, it's going to say look in rows 14 and 15. Then it's going to say rows 15 and 16, rows 16 and 17. So we need to fix that so that every single one of these references, we're actually going to be referring just to rows 13 or 14. So let's go ahead and make these absolute row references more specifically. Now, we're going to talk about how to do absolute cell references so the cells themselves don't change. But in this situation, we just need to leave the rows stable. What is the symbol that we use to input stability or to make something absolute? The $sign. So we're just going to type in a $sign. And by the way, yes, there is a shortcut for this, but you're not ready for that yet. Okay. Or maybe you've already learned it. Either one, I'm not going to teach it to you yet. But if you already know it, you can use that as well. All right. So let's go ahead and just flash fill that again. There we go. So we do have to be very careful about relative references because relative references can create problems for us when we're using B, especially when we're doing flash fills on H lookups. All right. With that, got to move on to homework. Okay. So a lot of questions about UML diagrams, and that should be a clue that I'm going to ask a lot of questions on the exam about UML diagrams. So you probably need to be for good at interpretation. Some of these questions I will need to spend some time doing some explanation. I will say that this is a little bit less intuitive. If I had my druthers, I probably would teach 3 and 4 together and then do homework of 3 and 4 together. And I haven't set the course up to do that because some of the information that we're going to be referring to in this chapter is going to be relevant to chapter 4, but it's really hard to understand without the context of chapter 4. So I am going to take it aside and I'm going to talk a little bit about that here in just a little bit. And it's not going to make as much sense now, but it will make a lot more sense next Monday when we start talking about chapter 4. So which of the following statements concerning this class diagram with multiplicities is not true? Well, if we're doing multiplicities, let's just go ahead and make sure we can actually interpret it based on what the value is, because we know how to interpret multiplicities now. So we say an order has to have one and only one customer. Because remember, we start with order, we move to the for multiplicity, we say order, one customer. Order has one and only one customer. All right. Is everybody good with that interpretation? Let's flip the script. We'll start with customer. Customer has to have 0 orders because customer could come in and not receive an order. They could be denied credit, but they can have many orders as well. So those interpretations are how we actually interpret the multiplicities of this diagram. We need to identify which one of these is not true. Well, it says on B, a customer can only place 1 order. Is that consistent with what we just talked about? No, a customer can place no orders. They could actually, or I guess they could place an order but not have it fulfilled. But they can place multiple orders as well. That's what the star multiplicity is. So B is our outlier there. Everything else is something that we can identify as correct. All right, moving down to 4. Which of the following statements is true about the following class diagram? Same activity. And I encourage you to do this for all of these types of questions when you're interpreting multiplicities, is make sure you understand what the multiplicities look like before you even look at the answers. So inventory can be involved in 0 sales, but can be involved in multiple sales. Sales have to involve at least one piece of inventory, but can involve multiple pieces of inventory. Does that interpretation sound reasonable? I know I'm asking that question. It's kind of like rhetorical. It's like, well, you said it, Dr. Barnes. It must be correct. I may actually say something that's not correct and see if you catch me. All right. The plot thickens. All right. But in this case, I didn't say anything correct. Those are correct statements. So which of these can be true? So can a sale involve 0 inventory items? No, that can't be the case. You don't have a sale if you have 0 inventory items. Can a sale involve 1 inventory item? Yes. Okay. Can a sale involve many inventory items? Yes. That means both B and C are true. Moving on to question 5, it's the same question, but it's looking at it's obligatory business rules. So what's an obligatory business rule? So remember, we talked about obligatory business rules. That's basically saying something that should happen. That's something that should happen. So let's look at the questions. Customers must provide a valid credit card number. So that's something that should happen in order for them to do business. So that's obviously a correct answer. Customers must enter a shipping address. That seems like an obligatory business rule as well. Customers may not enter a post office as a shipping address. That's not obligatory. That's something that's prohibited. Okay, prohibited business rule. And customers may use Visa, MasterCard. May implies not something that should happen, but something that may happen. That's going to be an allowed business rule. So those are the 3 types of business rules we talked about. A and B are the ones that we said are obligatory, so E is our answer. Moving on to question number 10. Which of the following best describes the meaning of this UML class diagram? A lot of this going on, All right, so new cars can be involved in 0 sales, but a maximum of 1 sale, because you can't sell a new car more than once. If you try to do that in the real world, there's a movie about that. It's called Fargo. If you try to do that, that's called fraud, okay? People don't take highly to that. We should not be putting fraud into our UML diagrams, okay? Put that in your notes. Don't put fraud into your UML diagrams, okay? People don't like that. A sale involves one new car and only one new car. So there we go. All right. So what are we gonna interpret? Each new car can be sold once. We have a winner right off the get-go, but let's go ahead and make sure that we don't have any all of the above. Sale can involve multiple new cars? No. Each new car can be sold multiple times? No. No new cars are in inventory? No. That would be awkward. All right, so E would be the none of the above, but we know A is correct, so we're gonna stick with A. All right, so moving through this next one, we're gonna have a lot of questions on this particular diagram here. So I'm gonna try to stick to this diagram and just read the questions out. I know you should have the homework in front of you so we can refer back to this. Some of these are gonna be pretty intuitive, and then we're gonna talk about the ones that are less intuitive. So question number 11 says, which of the following best describes the meaning of the multiplicity next to the number 1 in the preceding diagram? So this is the multiplicity right here. This is an important question, by the way, because a lot of the questions that I will ask you on the exam will be framed this way. When I say to interpret this multiplicity, you need to know where do we start and where do we end. So if I'm referring to this multiplicity, where do I start? Do I start with stocks or do I start with stock exchanges? Stocks, okay? So stocks can be on 0 stock exchanges or on many stock exchanges. That's how we interpret that multiplicity. Again, the good habit to get into is knowing what's being referred to, make that interpretation, and then answer the question. But for this one, when you actually see a number that's referring to a specific multiplicity, make sure you know the interpretation of that multiplicity before anything else. And again, I know it sounds like I'm harping on this. Trust me when I say every time I've taught this, which has only been 2 semesters teaching this method, but every time I've taught this, there's been misinterpretation of multiplicities. So if it sounds like I'm trying to, I don't know what the term for this is. If I'm trying to drive this home, it's because I want to make sure that you have a very clear understanding. If you already feel like you have a clear understanding, then this information is not for you. You're in good shape. I'm just making sure that everybody has a clear understanding. All right, so if that's the case, stocks are traded in only one exchange. Well, that's not correct. We know they're could be traded in multiple exchanges. Stocks are traded in at least one exchange. They could be traded in 0 exchanges. That's not correct. Stocks are traded in a minimum of 0 exchanges. That is correct. Stocks are traded at a maximum of many exchanges. That is also correct. So our answer is E. C and D are both correct. All right, which of the following best describes the multiplicities next to the number 2 of the preceding diagram? So we're down here now. So we started with stocks for 1. Logically speaking, for 2, we're going to start with stock exchanges. Stock exchanges have to have at least 1 stock. If it's got 0 stocks in your stock exchange, you're not exchanging anything, okay? So there's got to be at least 1 stock in a stock exchange, but there can be many stocks in that stock exchange. So fairly straightforward interpretation. We say that if you showed this to people outside of this classroom and say, hey, can you interpret this UML diagram for us? You're a loony. Yeah, that's all they would say to you, okay? So it's obvious to us, okay, because we're at higher order thinking right now. That's where we're operating. All right, so what's going on here? Each exchange trades at least 1 stock. Yep, we have to have at least 1 stock on a stock exchange in order for the trade here. Each exchange trades only 1 stock. Well, we know that we can actually trade more than 1, so B is not correct. Each exchange trades a minimum of 0 stocks. Can't have exchange if you don't have stocks, so C is not correct. Each exchange trades a maximum of many stocks. That's correct also, so A and D are both correct, which is going to be E. I don't like the fact that they've got 1 answer at the end, which is obviously the correct answer because that's the only option that they use multiple options. And they're just not really doing any confusion right here, but that's why we talk about it in class so we can interpret it. Number 14. Which of the following best describes the meanings of the multiplicity next to 3 in the preceding diagram? We're old acquaintances right now. So we're doing 1-to-1. We start with buy and sell transactions. Buy and sell transactions involve 1 stock and only 1 stock. Okay, so each buy and sell transaction involves 1 stock and only 1 stock. And so what is the interpretation for that? Each transaction involves at least 1 stock. That's correct. Each transaction involves only 1 stock. That's also correct. C and D are not correct because there's 0 in many stocks. It's just 1 stock. So that means the E is our answer. Number 15, which the following best describes number 4. So 4 says stocks can be involved in 0 transactions, 0 buy-sell transactions, or many buy-sell transactions. So an individual stock could be involved in no transactions. It could not be traded, or you could have it traded in multiple and different transactions. Okay, that's the nature of the trading. So each stock is bought and sold at least once. No. Each stock is bought and sold only once. No. Each stock is bought and sold a maximum of many times. Yes. Each stock is bought and sold a minimum of many times. By the way, you will never have a situation where you don't have a minimum of many that is not also followed by a maximum of many. You can have many to many. That just basically interpreted as it's always going to be more than 1. So, but this particular situation, we know that if that was the case, if it was a minimum of many, it would be on the left-hand side. It's not. It's 0 to many. So D is not correct, meaning C is our answer. Now, that's kind of good. That means that E is not the correct answer. Did it fool anyone? Did anybody answer E? You guys are too smart for my good. All right, so there we go. Now we're going to get to the confusing questions because 16 and 17 require a little bit of explanation. And this does relate to what we're going to be talking about next week, so it might be worthwhile to take some notes on this just to reference on this. So in 16, it says, which of the following is true to implement the buy-sell transactions and stocks classes and the association between them in the preceding UML class diagram as a database? Okay. Now I'm going to start by saying the answer to this is the primary key of stocks is a foreign key in buy-sell transactions. So the answer is A. Now, hold on to that because I'm going to explain that, but I want to talk about the other question first because it's not necessarily intuitive. Which of the following best describes the meaning of the multiplicities? That's the first one. Sorry, I think it's a different question. My apologies. 19. There we go. I want to look at 19. Which of the following is true to implement the buy-sell transactions and broker classes association between them in the UML class diagrams database? It says the primary key of the brokers is a foreign key in the buy-sell transactions. So both of these are answered A. And you may be asking, why doesn't it work the other way around? And for that question, I'm going to say, I'm happy you asked. Let me explain what's happening. This happened in the first year I taught this, and it was not immediately obvious, but I want to make sure that we're clear on what's happening. So here are the questions right here. We've said the primary key of stocks and the primary key of brokers can be a foreign key in buy-sell transactions, but the primary key of buy-sell transactions cannot be a foreign key in the other two. Everybody's probably thinking, it's like, all right, so I understand why one direction works, but why doesn't the other direction work? Let's go ahead and take a look at an example here. All right. So in this particular situation, I've got a buy-sell transaction table. I've got a lot of different transaction IDs, and then I've got the stocks that are listed here. Okay. Stock name is going to be listed as listed in the price here with Alphabet and at $40. Okay. It's going to be the current price that's listed at. Now, this is basically an individual stocks table and the individual brokers table. And so we can actually take this information for the individual stocks and the individual brokers, and we can put them as foreign keys in this buy-sell transaction table. We can say the transaction 10,000 was for $4,000. It involves stock A1. All right. We know stock A1 was Alphabet because that's what we pulled out from there. So we're actually saying this primary key allows for identification as a foreign key in this table. The primary key in the buy-sell transaction table is transaction ID. It's basically saying that this is the transaction that's taking place. What is involved in the transaction? It's going to be purchasing one stock and exactly one stock, because we said that transaction involves one to only one in our earlier questions. We can also say that the broker ID is this one person, because we only have one broker that's on that. So this is the answer to question. These are the answer A for each part of these. Okay, this is the answers A for 16 and 19, saying that we can include these primary keys down here as foreign keys in this table. What happens if we try to do the reverse? What happens if we try to include this primary key here as a foreign key down here? Well, let's go ahead and take a look. We've got stock A1 here as Alphabet. What is the transaction ID that Alphabet was involved in? The answer is there are multiple, okay? Because Alphabet was sold 3 different times. So do I have a unique transaction ID for my stocks or for my stocks table? Can I list a transaction ID right here that's going to say this is the occurrence that this happened? The answer is no, there's multiple occurrences that occurs. As we're going to find out on Wednesday, in order to be a foreign key or a primary key, it has to be a unique identifier. This actually violates the rule of that integrity. It's a referential integrity rule, is what it's called. It violates the rule because we're not referring back to a specific primary key in the table. We're referring back to multiple primary keys. The uniqueness violation occurs. So if we have multiple transactions or multiple identifiers that occur for one item, we cannot use those as foreign keys. So the reason that we're allowed to use these items, these primary keys here as foreign keys in this table is because there's only one occurrence. It's one and only one occurrence. If we don't have one-on-one relationship, we can't actually use those as identifiers in subsequent tables. The same holds true for brokers, okay? So we got MB123 as one of our brokers here. What's the transaction ID that we're going to use as a foreign key? Well, MB123 is involved in multiple transactions. So I can't identify a single transaction that MB123 is identified with because that individual is involved in multiple transactions. This is really confusing stuff. I'm going to try to reinforce this next Monday, but for right now, what you need to keep in mind is the multiplicities drive our use of foreign keys. We can only use a primary key as a foreign key if it has a one-to-one relationship, okay? Or I think maybe a 0 or 1 relationship in some situations, because it's not a violation for foreign keys to be null. But we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to relational databases on Wednesday. We'll refer back to this problem too as well, because I want to make sure this is driven home because it's very confusing. All right, going back to the homework, question number 17. 17 says, which of the following best describes the meaning of multiplicities next to number 5? Okay. Number 5, so buy-sell transfer. Brokers are involved in a minimum of 0 buy-sell transactions and maximum of many. So D is going to be our answer because they can be involved in a minimum of 0 buy-sell transactions. I'm running out of time, that's why I'm going faster, guys. So, and then number 18, which of the following best describes number 6? I had to interpret all of these. So 6 says buy-sell transactions can involve one broker and only one broker, which is again, important point of contention as to why we can use one as a foreign key and the other one is not. And so in that particular case, each buy-sell transaction involves only one broker, which is A. All right, let's go ahead and let's talk about our diagram. So we've got a couple problems here that actually have you do some UML diagrams. Now, I want you to know here, first of all, I'm not asking for complex UML diagrams. What you're about to see is about the level that I would expect for a UML diagram, not just for your homework, but also for your exam. If I ask you to graph a UML diagram, it's not going to get much more complex than what I'm about to show you. So don't get intimidated by this. Everybody is really, really worried about UML diagrams and saying, okay, this is an area that I'm really, really weak in. Keep to the basics, okay? Resource, event, agent, and identify each of the items that fall in those categories. And we're going to do that. We're going to go through our narrative. We're going to look at problem 1. Dr. Franklin runs a small medical clinic and specializing in family practice. She has many patients. When the patient visits the clinic, she may perform several tests to diagnose their conditions. She bills the patient one amount for the visit plus the amounts for each additional test. Okay, amounts for each test. So remember, we have to specify the resources, the events, and the agents. Okay, so let's just go ahead and do that. We're going to look at the first example, then we're going to try one on our own here in just a second. So for our event, patient comes to visit. Patient makes a visit and says, I don't feel well, doctor. I need something done. Who are the agents in this transaction? Well, obviously the doctor has to be there. Kind of defeats the purpose if the patient shows up and there's no doctor there. And obviously, if we're going to have a business, we need to have customers. So those patients have got to be customers. So we want to make sure that we got both the doctor and the customers, the doctor and the patients, I should say. And what is the resource that's provided? When somebody comes in for a visit, they want to find a way to make themselves well. So they provide tests to figure out what is wrong, and then probably a subsequent follow-up, though that's not mentioned in the particular scenario. You might say, wouldn't pharmaceuticals be a resource if there's a prescription? That answer could be technically correct. You could say that would be a resource that would be provided to the customers as well, but that's not necessarily need to be contained within the diagram. So if I asked you this question, this exact question on the exam, and you gave me this diagram right here, that would be 100% correct, okay? If you gave me any variation of this diagram, you'd probably be really close to correct. I'm pretty lenient with respect to that. Keep in mind when you're doing these analyses, you should also consider the multiplicities. I will not always ask for multiplicities, but it's a very good habit to get into to make sure you can do those interpretations. And some of them are subject to interpretation. You may look at this and say, well, Dr. Barnes, I'm not sure if I agree with the multiplicity next to patient visits. And say, well, let's see, patients in visit, or Dr. Franklin is involved in 0 patient visits because she may be off on one day, or she involved in many patient visits because she can have maximum many patient visits. So how do we interpret that? It's subject to change. You could say it's only 1 because if she's going to be at the clinic, she's got to have at least 1 patient. There's an argument for that as well. All right, let's go ahead and do our second problem now. By the way, does anybody need to look at that or more? Take a picture of it? Yes.
Is there a way to fit like billing in those events, or would that just not be
Fit one there?
like billing? Like it's mentions a lot of stuff about like billing.
Yeah, absolutely. You could actually make fit that as an event in there as well. And so, well, basically all we would do here is say that we've got 2 different events and they both involve Dr. Franklin patients. We'll look at more complex diagrams with multiple events and multiple resources a little bit later on. Since this is just introduction, I'm kind of living, but yeah, absolutely correct. Billing would actually be another event that we could include in there. So good question. All right. Next question. It's not going to get too much more complex than that. Paige runs a small frozen yogurt shop. She buys several favorite flavors of frozen yogurt mix from her yogurt supplier. She buys plastic cups in several sizes from another supplier. She buys cones from a third supplier. She counts yogurt cones as inventory, but treats cups as an operating expense and doesn't track any cup inventory. That's making things a lot more complex. You don't need to kind of break it down. Let's just go ahead and let's treat all of the items that she's going to be using as inventory, okay? Now, from accountant's perspective, you may say, well, that sounds like creps in our operating expense. And I say, well, good for you for never recognizing it's an operating expense. But for the time being, for our UML diagram, we're going to kind of compartmentalize everything together. So what is this diagram going to look like? The answer is it looks very similar to the diagram we just did. So we just talked about our resource. That's going to be our inventory. What's our event? Kind of a purchase. Somebody comes in and says, you know what? I really, really want to have some frozen yogurt. That's what drives everything. Who are the agents that are involved in that event? Paige has probably got to be there. It's going to be hard to run the frozen yogurt shop if she's not there. Any other agents that need to be involved? Oh, so actually, they can argue suppliers. That's a little bit beyond the scope, but yeah, suppliers would be an agent. An expanded diagram. We're keeping it simple. Probably the more obvious one would be customers. Yeah, the customers, and keep it in there. And that's all I was looking for here. Now, again, are there multiple other events, agents, and resources you can include here? Yes, you definitely could have expanded out your resources to say, well, I want to include yogurt and cones as separate resources. And if you did that, that's absolutely fine. Okay. This is all I'm looking for, but if you include yogurt and cones as a separate resource, the only reason that I say don't do that is because if you do separate those out as separate resources, you have to create multiplicities for both sets. Okay. You have to create multiplicities for both associations, which means creating two sets of multiplicities instead of one set of multiplicities. Same thing for multiple agents. Agents for suppliers could be tracked out here, and I would argue that that's a very, very rational assumption, and you get credit for that. But again, that also makes sure that you have to track out more events and more associations as well. By the way, just so there's no confusion, you may say, well, how are we going to know what the correct answer is, Dr. Barnes? First of all, the correct answers are open to interpretation. Secondly, for the questions that I will ask on the exam, I will usually specify what it is I'm looking for. I may provide you with a blank UML diagram and say, fill in the blanks. So that would be an answer. I will be very, very specific as to what I'm looking for with respect to these particular items. All right. I guess that wraps it up for today. So have a good weekend. I'll see you all on Monday for relational databases.